A routine extraction mission turns into a high-risk operation when intelligence fails and enemy numbers double. But the real turning point comes when a young Navy corpsman breaks a decade-old promise and takes a shot that changes everything. This story dives deep into battlefield decision-making, where seconds define survival and hidden skills redefine the outcome of war.
At 22 years old and standing 5'2", she was the only one in the room with a hidden past. It was a secret she never asked for, etched into her skin 12 years prior by a faulty rifle. It happened on a day her father swore was just practice. The physician had not discovered it, but in just 3 minutes, he would. Her entire life, built over a decade, was about to unravel inside a government office in Norfolk, Virginia, and she was powerless to prevent it. If you are already hooked, make sure you watch to the finish, because this story takes some incredible turns. Please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Also, leave a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale reaches. The waiting area at the Norfolk Naval Medical Center was filled with a special kind of quiet. It was the silence of those who endured pain without complaint. It was late February, and 41 veterans were waiting. 40 men and 1 woman who had avoided this meeting 4 times and had no more excuses. Raven Calloway sat in the 3rd row, her back perfectly straight. Her dark hair was loose, since the informal screening meant no uniform. She was 22, 5'2", and 115 pounds of pure discipline. People always misjudged her small size, which she preferred. Being underestimated was her only defense. Her blue-gray eyes scanned the area with trained precision, noting every exit, observing everyone's posture, and calculating the distance to the door. For 8 months, she had dodged this checkup. She used every excuse possible. A deployment, a training conflict, even a fake sickness. She did anything to escape the moment a doctor told her to take off her shirt. Then, the display changed, showing her name, Calloway R. She stood immediately. 11 years of training took over. When your name is called, you do not pause. You move smoothly and silently, drawing no attention. Room 4C. Dr. Aaron Hennessy, in his mid-50s with reading glasses, had a gentle face. It was the look of a man who had delivered difficult news many times. He was kind, but not weak. He looked from his screen to Raven, then did a quick double take, hiding it well. Petty Officer Calloway, HM1, active duty, he read, then scrolled. Stationed at Naval Station Little Creek, yes sir. SEAL Team 7, yes sir. Dr. Hennessy put the tablet aside. He studied her like a puzzle he could not solve. How long have you served? 4 years, sir. Joined at 18, and you are with a SEAL Team's medical program? I am the team corpsman, sir. At 22, you qualified? Yes, sir. He took notes. She watched his pen. He was meticulous, just as his record suggested. He was the type of doctor who noticed details. That was the whole problem. Any injuries? No, sir. Medications? No, sir. Allergies? No, sir. Hennessy finally looked up from his tablet, truly seeing her. All right, let's check your vitals. Please remove your shirt for the heart and lung exam. Raven froze. She had mentally practiced this exact scene 40 times over the last 3 months. She scheduled winter visits for long sleeves, asked for female doctors, and created schedule conflicts to prevent a full exam. She had planned an escape for every single possibility, but now there was no way out. Her hands reached for the bottom of her shirt. It was a slow, unstoppable movement. The shirt came over her head, revealing a white V-neck sports bra. She turned around as he asked. Dr. Hennessy placed his stethoscope on her back. Take a deep breath. She did. The cold metal touched her skin. It was a standard procedure, an exam she had given hundreds of times as a corpsman. It felt so different and intrusive on this side. Good. Another one, she inhaled again, and then he paused. His hand stopped moving somewhere on her back. 3 seconds went by, then 4, then 5. Petty Officer Calloway. His tone was different now. The professional calm was gone, replaced by a sharp focus. It was the voice of a doctor who just discovered a mystery. I need you to stay perfectly still. She obeyed. This scar. His fingers hovered over her skin. expertly judging its size and shape without making contact. Entry is on the left shoulder, in the back. Exit is on the front, right of center. He paused. This is a gunshot wound. Raven said nothing. A high-powered rifle. His voice was now certain. He sounded like a man who had read the histories of many bodies. The size of the entry, the path it took, the marks from the surgery. He walked around to her front. His gaze was locked on the wound, not with cruelty, but with an unyielding focus. Petty officer, explain how a Navy corpsman gets a rifle wound that goes straight through her. But before she could speak, the door swung open. Vice Admiral Marcus Holt entered, and the entire feel of the room shifted. He was 64 years old, 6'3", with silver hair in a military cut. He had 2 stars on his collar, but they were not what you noticed first. It was his presence, the air of a man who led special forces for 4 decades and carried the weight of every hard choice. He was there for a routine quarterly inspection of the Veterans Wellness Program. Just a normal visit. He had only been inside for 20 minutes, but his eyes saw the scar first. The world seemed to stop. Raven saw 3 distinct emotions flash across the Vice Admiral's face in under 2 seconds. First came recognition, then a flicker of shock. Underneath it all was a profound, ancient grief, so twisted with pride that it resembled pain. Calloway. His voice was raspy, as if he was unsure if his eyes were telling the truth. Raven Calloway. 11 years of service straightened her back before she even thought to move. She stood at attention, ignoring her vulnerability. Holt approached her slowly and with great care, like he was near something precious and fragile. He never touched the scar. He did not need to. He stood close enough to read it with 40 years of experience, and what he saw made his jaw clench. Barrett was the one who taught you to shoot. It was not a question. It was a statement loaded with a decade of secrets she had never shared. She swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Dr. Hennessy looked between them. Admiral, have you met this petty officer before? Holt faced the doctor. His voice was quiet, but held an authority that needed no volume. Doctor, I require 5 minutes alone with Petty Officer Calloway. Sir, this is the middle of her exam. 5 minutes. Hennessy knew it was a command. He departed without another comment. The door shut with a heavy click. The quiet felt like a funeral from 12 years ago, with a folded flag, a cold cemetery, and a young girl learning to hide her pain. Holt watched her for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost tender. Barrett Calloway, Master Gunnery Sergeant, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. He paused. 91 confirmed targets over 4 tours. The most gifted shooter I ever saw. And the greatest friend I ever had. You handed my mother the flag, Raven said, her voice quiet and controlled. It was at Arlington 10 years ago. I was 12, and my arm was in a sling. I remember. Holt met her gaze. The accident that left that scar was 4 months before he died. A training session at your family's place. The rifle malfunctioned. A metal fragment went right through your shoulder. I was lucky to keep my arm. Barrett blamed himself completely. He told me he should have inspected the barrel more closely, that he should have noticed the metal fatigue. Holt's jaw tightened. He also said that after you recovered, you promised your mother you would never touch a weapon again. Raven tensed up completely. For 10 years, she kept that promise at a distance, but it was still lodged inside her like a piece of metal, too dangerous to take out. If he felt that much guilt, she said, her voice sharper than she meant, then why did he go back? Why did he abandon us 4 months later? Holt did not even blink. Because men like your father never learn how to stop, he answered. We convince ourselves that we are the only ones who can do the work, that our skills are too important to sit on the bench, that by being away, we are keeping our families safe. He stopped, and in that moment, he seemed to age 10 years. It is a falsehood we embrace to continue doing the one thing we are good at, and he died doing it. Helmand Province, October 2014. An IED attack followed by gunfire from 3 sides. He was on lookout for a Marine patrol. He saw the ambush just in time. He held his position to protect their retreat. He saved every last Marine. Holt's voice became a whisper. He said everyone on his team was gone. His final radio call was just 5 words. Marines are clear. Out. Raven squeezed her eyes shut, took a deep breath against the tightness in her chest, and opened them again. I enlisted in the Navy at 18, she said, her voice now steady. I was a hospital corpsman, 4 years active, with 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I have done everything the right way, everything he would have respected. I help people. I have kept the promise I made to my mother. She looked directly into Holt's eyes. And no one knows I can shoot. Absolutely nobody, sir. Until this moment. Holt stared at her, analyzing her like an unexpected battlefield development. Until this moment, he confirmed. He paused for a long moment. Then he spoke. I am going to ask you a single question. I need you to consider it carefully before you reply. She stood by, waiting. If your men need you, the true you, not just Raven the medic, but Raven the marksman. The girl Barrett spent 6 years training, the one who reads wind at 1,000 meters better than operators with a decade of experience. If they require that part of you, and the only thing preventing it is a promise you made as a 12-year-old girl, lost in sorrow, he stopped. What will you choose to do? The question hung between them like a cloud of smoke. Raven glanced at her reflection in the mirror on the opposite wall. She saw the scar there, the entry point, the exit point. It was a constant reminder of the day her father's rifle malfunctioned. She nearly died in the bed of his truck on a dusty New Mexico road, while he drove and begged her to keep her eyes open. I do not know, sir. Yes, you do. Holt's voice was soft but firm. You know precisely what you will do. You will do what Barrett would have done. You will do what every person in this uniform does when the critical moment comes. He walked to the door, placing his hand on the knob. You will do what is necessary. That promise will shatter, and you will learn to live with it. Because a broken promise is better than dead teammates you failed to save. He looked back at her one last time. Barrett always said he was not teaching you how to kill. He was teaching you how to protect. He said one day someone would need protection, and his little girl would be the only one there to provide it. Holt held her gaze. I believe that day is approaching, Raven. Likely very soon, when it arrives. Do not second-guess yourself. Barrett would not want that. Sir, she said, stopping him before he left. Thank you for attending his service at Arlington. It meant a lot. He was my brother, Holt replied. That means you are family. If you ever need anything, whether it is advice, help with the chain of command, or just the honest truth, you call me. Is that understood? Understood, sir. And then he was gone. Hennessy came back 2 minutes later, his professional demeanor perfectly in place. He finished his exam without mentioning the scar again. He approved her for full duty and sent her off with some forms and a follow-up visit she knew she would never need. Raven got dressed without a word, buttoned her uniform, and checked her appearance in the mirror before leaving. To anyone watching, she was just another sailor after a routine checkup. But a secret, once spoken, takes on a life of its own. It creates a force that pulls all the carefully separated parts of a person's life toward an inevitable collision. Back at the Little Creek base, SEAL Team 7 was waiting to see what she was made of. They simply had no idea they were about to ask the wrong question. The return trip to Little Creek was 40 minutes long. Raven gripped the steering wheel the entire time, her father's voice echoing in her mind. It always did when she neared something she had tried so hard to avoid. It was not his words, but the patient, exact tone of a man who never had to raise his voice. She was only 12 years old when he first gave her a rifle. Her mother was inside preparing lunch. Barrett had made sure they were alone in the field. 200 meters of flat New Mexico land lay before them, with a steel target glinting in the sun. He knelt next to her and said softly, I am not teaching you to shoot, Raven. I am teaching you how to think clearly under stress. The gun is simply your instrument. For 6 years, she had trusted him. She trusted him completely until the morning the gun failed, and for a long time after that, she did not trust anything at all. The base at Little Creek appeared unchanged from when she left 2 hours earlier. It had concrete walls, chain link fences, and buildings worn down by years of salty air and hard service. Raven parked her vehicle and sat for a moment longer than necessary. Then she got out and walked inside as if nothing was different. The briefing room had the familiar smell of coffee and gun cleaner. Commander Decker Strauss was at the front of the room as she entered. He was in his mid-40s, with a look of deep-seated patience etched on his face. He was the type of leader who understood that waiting was often the quickest way forward. He saw her come in, but said nothing about her absence. 11 operators were already in the room. Raven found a seat in the last row. Chief Warrant Officer Gabe Maddox was 2 seats away. His nickname was Hammer. He was 51 years old, a former Marine, with a voice that sounded like gravel. During her first week, he had her perform a buddy carry. She managed to move all 190 pounds of him over 50 meters of rough terrain without losing her form. Afterward, he looked at her like a man reevaluating his assumptions. He simply said, "That is something." It was the only praise he ever gave her. Senior Chief Petty Officer Darius Cole was at the other end of the table. They called him Ghost. He was 48 and had the silence of a man who had seen too much to waste his words. He had been observing Raven since her 3rd day, not with anger, but with the sharp focus of someone putting a puzzle together. She had seen him watching her, and it made her act with more caution. Petty Officer First Class Connor Walsh was slouched in the seat right in front of her. He was 29, with a sharp face and an even sharper sense of doubt. He had been calling her 52 since she arrived. It was not true hostility, just the kind of ritual testing common in these teams. "Okay, everyone," Strauss began. "Here is the updated mission plan. This is a recovery operation. 2 American intelligence agents were taken 48 hours ago near the border of Jordan and Syria. We have confirmed they are still alive. The enemy force is estimated between 18 and 22. We leave Sunday at 0400. An image of a compound appeared on the screen. There was only one road leading in and one road leading out. It was the kind of place that made getting out very complicated if things went bad." "What is the doc's job?" Walsh asked without quite raising his hand. "Stuck at base camp again?" Strauss looked at Raven. "Calloway will stay at the rally point. She will handle communications and prepare for any wounded we bring back." He paused. "I want a medical brief on Sunday morning before we go. Cover all the worst case possibilities, from gunshot wounds to shrapnel. If anyone comes back to us breathing, I expect you to be ready." "Yes, sir." Walsh swiveled in his chair to face her. He had the familiar look of someone who was about to say something he had already decided on. "With all due respect, Doc, 18 to 22 hostiles is a lot of firepower for 6 operators and a corpsman who has never fired a shot in combat. I will be at the rally point, Walsh. You will not need me to fire anything." "Right, but what happens if the rally point is no longer safe?" "In that case, I will handle it." Walsh stared at her for a second before turning away. Hammer made a quiet noise that was almost a laugh. Ghost remained silent, but Raven could feel him mentally recording the whole exchange. The meeting went on, covering schedules, backup plans, and radio procedures. Raven took in every single detail, just as she always did, with a calm expression that revealed none of the intense calculations happening in her mind. When the room emptied, Ghost lingered. He walked over to her as she packed up her notes, standing near enough to keep their talk private. "How did the appointment go?" She met his eyes. It was just routine. "Good." He stood quietly for a second. "We have a range session at 1400. It is a refresher for the M9 pistol. You are on the list." "I am aware." He turned to leave, but then paused, in that deliberate way he had, as if he saved the most important thing for the end. "That wind adjustment you called out last Tuesday. 600 meters, 9 inches of correction. You called it before the range flags even moved." Raven's face showed nothing. "I was just reading the heat shimmer, Senior Chief." "That was not a shimmer reading. That was a complex ballistic calculation." He let his words hang in the air for 2 seconds. "I have been doing this for 22 years. I can tell the difference." His gaze was steady, without any threat. "Just watch and learn, Doc. The things we pay attention to are often the things that end up saving us." He was gone before she could form a reply. She stood alone, the image of the enemy compound still glowing on the screen. She recalled what Holt had asked her. She recalled the answer she had given him, and she recalled the fact that her answer had been a complete lie. The next day's training began at 05:30, a 2-mile run, followed by exercises, and then the real test. Carrying a partner for 50 meters across gravel as the sun rose, cold and orange, in the sky, Raven stayed in the middle of the group during the run. She was not up front with Walsh and another operator, Garrett, who were competing against each other. She was not at the back, where any weakness would be noted and remembered. The middle was for those who were capable but did not stand out, and that was precisely what she wanted. Walsh's voice drifted back to her as they ran. The words were meant for Garrett, but loud enough for her to hear. How long until she quits on the march? 3 weeks on the team, and some still thought she would fail. Raven just saved her energy and held her pace. But everything changed on Thursday during the trauma drill. The exercise was a simulated explosion with 2 injured men, few supplies, and an instructor firing blanks and throwing smoke. Raven had practiced this drill 60 times over 2 deployments. Her hands knew every step before her mind could even process the full scene. The first man had a major leg bleed. She had 90 seconds before he would go into shock. She placed the tourniquet high on his thigh, wrapped it, and began to twist the rod. The actor playing the victim screamed, making it feel real. She kept turning the rod, 3 twists, then 4. The bleeding stopped. She looked at her time. It took her only 16 seconds. The standard was 30 seconds. The second man had a collapsed lung. She felt for the right spot, inserted the needle, and listened for the hiss of air. Then she started an IV and gave him pain medicine. She did all this while fake gunshots echoed around her and smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. After the drill, Hammer checked his stopwatch. He looked at the time, then at her, and back at the time again. "That's the best I have seen from a new medic in 15 years, he said. It was not a compliment, just a simple fact. Across the yard, Strauss gave a nod of agreement. Calloway knows her job, but Walsh, who was watching from a wall, pushed himself forward. Medical skill is the minimum requirement. We need people who can also fight. Raven heard him and stored the comment away. She felt no anger, just took it as information. He was asking the same question every team has. Will you be a liability in a fight? It was a reasonable question. She knew she could not answer it with words. On Friday morning, the mission details were updated. The number of guards was now 22 to 28. One of them was flagged as a former soldier and a trained sniper. Walsh looked directly at Raven when Strauss announced that part. He said nothing. He did not have to. Later, Ghost found her at the medical station as she checked her supplies for the 3rd time that day. He rounded a corner and paused, watching her hands move through the pack. Bandages, gauze, and IV kits were all in their exact places, ready to be found in total darkness, by touch alone. You have done this before, he said. 2 deployments, Senior Chief. Not the inventory check, he replied. The preparation. He watched her hands. You are setting this up for a situation where you cannot see, cannot slow down, and cannot risk grabbing the wrong thing. He paused. That is not something they teach in training. That comes from discipline built on real experience. She continued her work. An explosion hit our convoy in Mosul back in 2022. We lost 2 trucks and had 4 wounded men in the dark. I had 14 seconds from the blast to the first man bleeding out. She did not look at him. After that, you do not just reach for things, you place them. Ghost was silent. Then he asked, what is your take on the plan? She stopped and looked right at him. Team leaders did not ask medics for tactical advice. This was unusual. Going from 22 to 28 guards is a big jump for a 6-man team, she said. It is, he agreed, his voice flat. The trained sniper worries me more than the extra men because Stone will not always have a clear shot. Ghost stood completely still. Stone is our main sniper. How did you know his code name? Raven met his gaze. I read the mission plan, Senior Chief. It is not written plainly, but the sniper position on the ridge, with its high ground and 800-meter distance, is set up for a precision rifle. That is not a job for a spotter. Ghost observed her for a long, quiet moment. "Keep reading the plans like that," he finally said, "and keep that M9 pistol on you Saturday night." He started to walk away. Safe zones are not always as safe as Command thinks. As he left, Raven knew that Ghost had already sensed a secret she was hiding. He did not know the details, but he saw the shape of it. It was a secret that influenced everything she did and said, and a man who had spent 22 years studying people had seen its outline without her saying a word. On Saturday night, she sat alone with her phone, looking at her mother's name on the screen. She stared at it, but did not make the call. She thought about what Ghost had asked her, about the answer she gave, and the one she kept to herself. In 36 hours, she would be at a rally point 12 kilometers from a building with 28 armed men and 1 sniper. And she was only allowed to carry a medical bag and a handgun. And deep inside her, something her father had instilled over 10 years of careful work was waiting. It was patient, like it had always known this moment would arrive. The C-17 aircraft landed at the base in southern Jordan at 02:30 in the morning. The heat seeped into the plane before the ramp even opened. It was not a gentle warmth, but a harsh heat that felt like it stole the air from your lungs. Raven stepped out carrying 58 pounds of medical gear, and the heat hit her like a sudden, unmade choice. The team moved with a smooth efficiency that came from doing this so many times they no longer needed to think about the basic steps. They checked their gear, their weapons, and their radios. Raven checked her medical supplies for the 4th time since leaving home and found everything in its place. That was the whole point, because in 14 seconds of darkness and confusion, your hands must find what they are looking for. New information came in at 1600 hours. Strauss called them into the briefing tent. The look on his face said it all. "The guard count has been updated," he said. 22 to 28 foreign fighters are there. One is flagged as a former soldier from Eastern Europe, a trained sniper. He looked at the team. "We will proceed as planned. The clients we are helping do not have time for us to change our approach." Walsh glanced at Raven, but his expression was different now. It was no longer simple doubt. They left at 1900 hours, 7 soldiers and 1 medic, who would wait at the rally point. The team vanished into the desert, leaving Raven with 2 drivers, a radio, and the heavy silence of waiting for others to face danger. At 2050, Petty Officer Eli Drummond stumbled near a truck. Raven's head shot up before he even fell. She had been watching him for 40 minutes, without knowing why. Something was off about his walk, and the reddish color that had been creeping up his face since 1800 hours. She reached him in 4 quick steps, her hands already assessing him as her mind confirmed the diagnosis. His skin was hot and dry, with no sweat. His face was an unhealthy shade of red. His pulse was fast and weak. "Drummond, sit down," she ordered. "I am fine, Doc. I just need a minute." "Sit down now," she repeated. The authority in her voice made him obey. She checked his temperature, his eyes, and his awareness. It was heat stroke, not just exhaustion. This was the dangerous kind, the type that can cause organ failure and brain damage if not treated quickly. She looked up. "Hammer, I need you." Hammer ran over and saw the urgency on her face. "What is it?" "Heat stroke. His core temperature is likely 105 or more. He needs IV fluids and to be cooled down right now." She was already getting her supplies. "I need someone to contact Commander Strauss. We have to delay our movement until Drummond is stable." Hammer looked from Drummond back to Raven. He seemed fine 20 minutes ago. "Heat stroke comes on fast," she said. He stopped sweating. "Chief, that is a late stage. We have about 10 minutes before he could have a seizure." She put the 18-gauge IV line in his arm. 10 minutes. I need Strauss on the radio now." Hammer hurried off. Walsh appeared from behind the truck with water even before she asked. "What do you need? Keep these towels wet. We will switch them every 2 minutes. We need to lower his body temperature slowly." She checked the IV drip. Too fast could create other problems. Walsh knelt next to Drummond and did exactly as she said, without a single question. That was different. She made a mental note of it and kept working. Strauss approved the delay immediately. 30 minutes. Drummond would stay at the base, and he was Raven's responsibility. 28 minutes later, Drummond was sitting up and drinking water by himself. His color was returning to normal. He looked at Raven with the eyes of a man who had just realized he had narrowly avoided a disaster he never saw coming. "How did you know so fast?" "You changed," she said simply. "The way you were walking, your color, your skin was not sweating like it should in this heat." She checked his pulse again. "I have been keeping an eye on you since 1800. I did not feel that bad," he said. "That is how it happens." Walsh, who was still beside them, was quiet for a second. Then he said, without any showmanship, I was standing right beside him. "I did not see a thing." "Different training?" Raven replied. Walsh glanced at her, gave a single nod, then got up and walked off without another word. It was the most attention he had paid her. The team rolled out at 7:30 p.m. Raven watched them go before settling by the radio. She checked her med station for a fifth time. Tourniquet, gauze, chest seals, all placed where her hands could grab them blind, with no time to think. At 2200 hours, the silence shattered. "Contact, contact, we are under fire." Walsh's voice was tight and strained. Gunfire erupted behind his words. It was not the sound of a controlled fight, but the pure chaos of a plan falling apart. The intel was wrong. 25 plus, we need extraction. Strauss, rocket-propelled grenade on the east wall. Raven, we need you now. Vehicle 1 is coming for you. She was moving before he could finish. 58 pounds on her back. She jumped into the truck before it completely stopped, and it was racing off before the door was even closed. 12 kilometers of desert in 9 minutes. The driver wore night vision and never slowed, even on terrain that demanded caution. She did not let her mind wander to her mother. She focused only on what she would face and what she would need, and in what order. In the dark of the bouncing vehicle, her hands moved through her pack by touch alone, confirming every item she had already checked 5 times. The vehicle screeched to a halt. She jumped out while it was still moving. She ran the final kilometer on foot with 58 pounds of gear, the sound of gunfire guiding her. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness ahead, the distinct sounds of American M4s and enemy AKs mixing in the night. She found the team taking cover behind a low stone wall. Walsh was down. Dark patches were spreading high on his right leg, the femoral artery. He had 90 seconds before shock, 2 minutes before he would be gone. She slid to the ground beside him. Bullets whizzed just over their heads. She didn't hear them as danger, just as information about the environment she was in. "Walsh, look at me." His eyes met hers, wide and already losing focus. "Doc, I cannot feel my leg. Blood loss. I am fixing it. Keep looking at me." She grabbed the tourniquet. Her hands moved with a certainty that came from training so intense it removed the need to think. High on his thigh, 1 wrap. She threaded the strap through the buckle and grabbed the rod. Twist. Walsh cried out in pain. She kept twisting. 1 full turn. 2. 3. The bleeding slowed to a trickle, then stopped. 4 turns. She secured the rod. 17 seconds. She started the intravenous line. "You are stable. You are going to make it. Pain like that means you are alive. Now stay with me." Strauss dropped down next to her, breathing hard, his face covered in sweat and grime. "We have to go. They are coming around the west side. Can he walk?" "No. We will carry him." "Can you move while we—" The muzzle flash came from a rooftop to the north, 260 meters away from a higher position. Raven saw it an instant before she heard the crack of the rifle, and in that half second, she knew exactly what was happening. It was the Eastern European sniper from the new intelligence reports. A former soldier, he had waited patiently through the chaos, looking for the most important target. He had found Strauss. The sniper's rifle was perfectly steady. He was taking his time. That is what trained marksmen do when they have a clear shot and the target is unaware. They take their time and make it a clean shot. Strauss was leaning over Walsh, completely exposed. He was 4 seconds from a shot that would eliminate the team's leader in the middle of a firefight. Walsh's M4 rifle lay 2 feet from Raven's hand. It had a scope, it was loaded, and the safety was off. She heard her father's voice. It was not a memory, but something deeper. A feeling that lived in her hands, her shoulders, and in the stillness of a breath held at the perfect moment. When the time comes, you do not think, you act. thinking get soldiers killed. Then she heard her mother's voice from a gray November morning at Arlington. The day the flag was folded, the rifles fired, and a 12-year-old Raven stood in a sling and made a promise she had kept for 10 long years. She reached for the rifle. Her hands knew what to do. 10 years could not erase the 6 years of muscle memory her father had so patiently built. She checked the chamber. A round was ready. She raised the scope, estimated the range, read the wind. Light from the northwest, 260 meters. An elevated target. The bullet drop would be small at this distance. A tiny correction for the wind. She had made this shot before. She had made much harder shots on worse days, with her father spotting for her in the swirling New Mexico dust. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, and it felt like it had been waiting for her for 10 years. Ghost's voice was low and sharp. "Doc, what are you doing? I have the shot." Strauss turned and saw her. His eyes went wide. "Calloway." She squeezed the trigger, a smooth and steady pull, just like Barrett Calloway had taught his daughter on a practice range when she was only 10 years old. Back when the world was simple enough to believe that shooting was just about learning to think under pressure, the rifle cracked. 1.8 seconds of flight time. The sniper on the roof was thrown backward and vanished. The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds before the gunfire started again. But in the small space behind the wall, everything had stopped. Walsh stared up at her from the ground. Ghost was frozen. Strauss had not moved an inch. Raven put the rifle down and turned back to Walsh. She checked the tourniquet. Still tight. She checked his pulse. 108 and steady. She adjusted his intravenous drip, avoiding eye contact with any of them. "Walsh is stable," she said. "The tourniquet is holding. He needs a medical evacuation, but he has time." Strauss still had not moved. "Calloway." His voice was half as loud as usual. "That was 260 meters. Yes, sir. A moving target, and you were under fire." "Yes, sir." "First shot." She remained silent. "Where?" Strauss said slowly. "Did you learn to shoot like that?" Raven looked right at him. It was the secret she had held for 10 years, through 2 deployments and every training session where she had mentally calculated wind speed while pretending to check the flags, through every mission briefing where she understood the ballistics before anyone explained it, through every moment her father's training pushed to get out, and she had pushed it back down. "My father, sir." "Your father?" Hammer crawled over from the left, his voice a whisper. "Who was your father, Doc?" 3 seconds. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Barrett Calloway, 1st Recon, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, 91 confirmed kills." The name hit them exactly as she knew it would. Hammer's expression shifted from recognition to shock, and then to something like awe, all in less than 2 seconds. He was old enough to have served then. He knew exactly who Barrett Calloway was. "Barrett Calloway?" he breathed. "The Barrett Calloway? He trained me from age 10 to 16. Then he deployed and did not come home." Her voice was flat, without emotion. It had to be, because the alternative was a breakdown she could not afford. "At his funeral, I promised my mother I would never touch a gun again. For 10 years, I kept that promise." She looked at Walsh, at his stabilized wound, and the life-saving tourniquet. "Today, I broke it." Strauss considered this for as long as the battle allowed, which was not very long. More gunfire erupted from the east. The enemy was trying to cut off their escape. "Can you do that again?" Raven met his gaze. "Yes, sir. Right now, while we are moving to cover our retreat." "Yes, sir. Then pick up that rifle." Strauss turned. "Stone, Ghost. We will carry Walsh on a litter. Calloway, you are with me on rear security. We move in 30 seconds." Ghost looked at Raven. He looked like a man who had been putting a puzzle together for 3 weeks and had just found the final piece. He said nothing. He just picked up Walsh's litter. They moved. It was a combat extraction. They moved backward, fast and loud. Raven and Strauss covered the rear, rifles up, scanning the dark. At 170 meters, an 8-man squad appeared from the rubble to the east, trying to block their path. It was a standard flanking move, done by professionals. Raven spotted them first. Contact right, 8 targets, 170. She engaged, firing controlled bursts, just as her father had taught her, until it was pure instinct. The first target went down, then the second, and a third. 4 seconds. The remaining 5 scrambled for cover. Their escape route was clear. Strauss glanced at her as they ran. He did not say a word. There was nothing to say that her actions had not already said for him. They made it to the vehicles. Walsh was loaded inside. The medical helicopter was inbound. 9 minutes. 9 minutes to defend the area with 1 wounded man. 2 contractors were still unaccounted for because the mission had gone sideways, and a 22-year-old medic was holding a rifle she swore on her father's grave she would never touch again. From the back of the truck, Walsh reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were sharp. "Doc, you are stable, Walsh. Be still." "I know." He held her eyes with his. "I am sorry I called you 52. Raven just looked at him for a second. "Get some rest. You lost a lot of blood. I mean it. I know you do." She checked his tourniquet one last time. Rest. The helicopter landed hard, kicking up a storm of dust that blinded them. The crew chief gave a thumbs up, model. The helicopter carrying Walsh climbed into the sky. It disappeared into the darkness before the swirling dust even had a chance to settle. In the aftermath of the fight, the team sat in a heavy quiet. It was the unique silence that comes after adrenaline fades, when the reality of what just happened floods in to take its place. Raven held the rifle on her lap, her hands perfectly still, hearing her father's calm and steady voice in her mind, just as it had always been. Ghost came and sat near her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He glanced at the rooftop where the enemy sniper had been positioned. Then his eyes turned to Raven. "Your very first shot in combat," he said in a low voice. 260 meters. A moving target while you were under fire, and you hit him with the first bullet. "Yes, Senior Chief, I had him in my sights." Ghost's tone was not judgmental, just stating facts. "I was just about to take the shot myself when you fired." He paused for a moment. "I met your father once. It was in Pendleton, back in 2013, during a joint training. He was the most natural shooter I had seen in my 22 years. He stopped again. He spoke about his daughter. He mentioned she had the most stable hands he had ever seen on a person so young. He said she grasped the math of it quicker than operators with a decade of experience." He paused once more. "He was very proud of you." Raven felt a lump form in her throat, an emotion she could not afford to feel at that moment. "He also mentioned that you had chosen a different career," Ghost went on, "to heal people instead of fighting. He said he understood your reasons. He told me he hoped that would be enough to keep you safe. It was not." Raven said it was not enough to keep him safe, either. Ghost gave a slow nod, letting her words hang in the air without trying to offer comfort. "Your father would have understood your actions tonight," he said. "He would more than understand. He would have insisted you did the right thing. He taught you how to protect others. That is what you did." Raven gazed at the rifle she was holding. Her father had placed it in her hands at 10 years old and said it was about thinking clearly under pressure. It was the one thing she had vowed to leave behind, and she had stayed away from it for 10 years with all her strength. It was also the thing that saved Strauss's life tonight, as blood stained the ground nearby. "I know," she said, and she truly did. That was the knowledge that would be the most difficult to bear. It was not the broken promise, or even the shot itself. The hardest part was that when she grabbed the rifle, a piece of her that had been silent for a decade awoke. Underneath the sorrow and the weight of her actions, she felt a surprising sense of coming home. The debriefing took place in the main tent at 0130, and no one took a seat. Strauss stood at the front in his usual stance, leaning forward with his arms crossed. It was the posture of a man processing events into useful information. The rest of the team gathered around him, weary and covered in dust, but still buzzing with the high alert that lingers for hours after combat. It was the body's way of not yet trusting that the threat was truly gone. Raven remained at the back of the tent. The rifle was stored with Walsh's equipment. Her hands were now clean. Her expression was unreadable. "Walsh is in surgery in Germany," Strauss announced. "He is having his femur repaired. The doctor expects a full recovery." He should be back on duty in 8 to 10 weeks. He then looked at Raven. Calloway applied that tourniquet in 17 seconds while being shot at. Walsh is alive because she did that. He paused. Calloway also took out a skilled sniper from 260 meters with one shot before he could target my position. He paused again. She then laid down covering fire during our extraction and eliminated 3 more enemy fighters. The room fell into a thick, textured silence. Hammer was the first to speak. "How many combat shots have you fired before tonight, Doc?" "None," Raven replied. No one moved. "So your first time ever in a firefight," Hammer said slowly, "involved a moving target at 260 meters while you were under fire." "Yes, Chief. And you hit it with your first shot." "Yes, Chief." Garrett, who had barely spoken to Raven for 3 weeks, pushed himself off the wall and looked at her, all skepticism gone from his face. "Where did you learn to shoot?" "My father. From the time I was 10 until I was 16. We used a private range outside of Taos, New Mexico." "What was his service history?" "Marine Corps Scout Sniper, 1st Recon, with 4 combat tours." Garrett nodded slowly, processing the new information. He said nothing else. Strauss scanned the room. "I have to ask you something, Calloway. I need a straight answer. No hesitation. Sir, can you consistently repeat what you did tonight under similar or even worse circumstances?" Raven looked him directly in the eye. "Yes, sir," she answered without any doubt. Strauss unfolded his arms. "In that case, we need to discuss how this team will function from now on." He turned his attention to Ghost. "Senior Chief, I need your assessment." Ghost had been standing quietly to the side since the debrief began, observing Raven with the intense focus of a man completing a long and complex thought. He took a beat before speaking, which was his habit, because Ghost never spoke without thinking things through completely. "I have served in this community for 22 years, he said. "I have served with 43 corpsmen on 7 different teams. I have never witnessed a corpsman do what she did tonight," he paused. "And I have never seen anyone conceal that level of skill so perfectly." He looked straight at Raven. Why? The entire room held its breath. Raven knew this question was coming from the moment she put the rifle down. She had been piecing together her answer during the extraction, the helicopter ride, the drive back, and in the quiet of the last 2 hours. She had prepared the real answer, not the simple one. "I made a promise to my mother at my father's funeral that I would never handle a gun again," she said. "I was 12 years old, he had just been killed in action, and she was standing before a flag that had covered his coffin. I would have promised her anything in that moment." Her voice was steady, not emotionless, but controlled. "There is a difference, and the men in that room were skilled enough to recognize it. I enlisted in the Navy to save lives. I honored that promise through 4 years of service and 2 deployments. Keeping it was the only way I could honor my father without becoming the thing that took him from us." She paused. "I broke my promise tonight because I could not stand by and let Commander Strauss die." The silence that followed was deep, a sign that everyone was truly listening to her words. Hammer cleared his throat. "Do you think your mother will understand?" "I do not know, Chief." She met his gaze directly. "I hope she will." Strauss allowed the moment to settle for just the right amount of time before he made the decision that was already clear. "First thing in the morning, you will complete a full marksmanship evaluation. I have to know exactly what kind of skill set we are dealing with." He looked at Ghost. "You will supervise it." "Yes, sir. Does anyone here have a problem with that?" No one did. The doubt that had been present in the room 3 weeks prior was gone. It was replaced by something more productive: professional interest. The question was no longer if she was capable, but just how capable she was. And that was a question that needed an answer. As the tent emptied, Ghost paused beside her. He spoke in a low voice, not for privacy, but just in his usual quiet way. "Get some rest. At least 2 hours. We start early tomorrow, and my evaluations are not easy." "Understood, Senior Chief." He began to leave, then paused and turned back. "Your father shared something with me the one time we met. He said, 'I'm not teaching my daughter how to kill, Stone. I'm teaching her to have a choice, the ability to act and the wisdom to know when to act.'" He met her eyes. "You faced that choice tonight. You knew when the time was right. That is the difficult part. The shooting is simply technique. Then he was gone. Raven stood by herself in the deserted tent for a minute, hearing the silence of the desert outside. It was a kind of quiet that only happens around 2 in the morning, after the chaos has ended but before the wind begins. She took out her phone, looked at her mother's name for a long time, then put the phone back in her pocket. Not just yet. She needed to find the right words first. She called Holt instead. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he was not sleeping, which meant Strauss had already contacted him. I heard, Holt said. Strauss called me 40 minutes ago. He wanted me to tell him everything I knew about Barrett training you. He paused. I told him everything. I should have spoken with you first. I am sorry. It is okay, sir. No, it is not. That was your story to share. He paused again. You broke your promise. I did. Tell me everything that happened. So she told him about it all. Walsh's tourniquet, the sniper on the building, the shot, the extraction, and the 3 hostiles on the east side of the position. After she was done, Holt was silent. For so long, she looked at her phone to see if they were still connected. Your father trained you for this exact situation, he said at last. It was not to turn you into a weapon, but to give you the ability to protect the people fighting alongside you. You used that ability tonight, and because of it, 3 people are alive. His tone softened a little. He would have been proud. I want you to hear me and really believe that. It does not feel like something to be proud of, sir. It never does. Not the first time you do it. He paused. But you learn to live with it. Because the other option is living with the memory of the people you could have saved but did not. You understand that now. Yes, sir. Call your mother tonight. She should hear this news from you before anyone else tells her. His voice was heavy with the experience of a man who had learned that lesson the hard way. She is much stronger than you realize. She was married to Barrett Calloway. She was always aware that a day like this might come. The call finished. Raven held the phone in her hands for another 10 minutes. Then she made the call. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was clear and awake, which meant she had been awake. It was as if some universal connection between mothers and their children had been sending signals for the past 4 hours. Raven, are you all right? No, Mom, I am not hurt. She heard a sigh on the other end of the line. Relief. Then came the careful questioning that always follows relief. Tell me what happened. So Raven told her everything. She finally told her mother everything, leaving nothing out. The words she had avoided for 2 hours now hung in the air. I took the rifle, I took the shot, I broke my promise. When Raven was done, her mother was silent. Raven could hear her breathing, sensing a quiet filled with thought, not judgment. Underneath it all, she heard the faint echo of a mother who knew this call would come one day, but could never truly be ready. Mom, I heard you. Her mother's voice finally came, not shaky, but steady. There is a world of difference. You gave me your word when you were just 12. Your father had just been buried. You were cold, with your arm in a sling, and I was in no state to be asking my daughter to make promises. A brief pause. I never should have asked that of you. I have regretted that for years. Raven replied. I wanted to promise. You did not force me. I know, but I still accepted it from you. Her mother's voice trembled slightly. You were just protecting me like you always do, the way he taught you, she said, regaining her composure. Raven, your father went away 4 times. Each time, I knew there was a chance he would not return. I made peace with that possibility, long before I had to make peace with him being gone. A short silence. He taught you those skills out of love. He wanted you to have choices. Barrett Calloway believed the worst thing he could leave his daughter was a feeling of helplessness. Raven squeezed her eyes shut, took a breath, and opened them. I killed someone, Mom. No. You protected someone. That difference is what matters. Do not ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Your reason matters. The situation matters. You did not kill from anger or hate. You killed because your commander was 4 seconds from death. And you were the only one who could do anything about it. Her mother's voice was firm now, with the strength of someone who had thought about this moment for a decade. Your father faced that same choice on 4 tours. He came home from 3 of them. The 4th time, he did not come home because he made that choice for his entire Marine patrol. She paused again. He would not want you to feel shame for this. He would want you to see it as your purpose. The tears started then, silent but heavy, the kind that arrive without warning. Raven did not fight them. She was all alone at a base in Jordan at 2 in the morning, with no one to be strong for. I miss him, Mom. I know, my dear. I do too. Every single day. I know. A moment passed. But he is still with you, in your hands, in how you think when everything is on the line, in the choice you made tonight. That is not him being gone. That is his legacy in you. Her voice softened. I am so proud of you. I am terrified, but I am so incredibly proud of you. Please come home safely. I will. I love you, Raven. I love you too, Mom. The call disconnected. She sat in the darkness for a long time, letting the quiet tears flow, feeling grief and relief wash over her at the same time. It was the feeling of finally letting go of something you have held for too long. A weight she had carried for 10 years, a version of herself she had carefully maintained. She let out a small laugh. 10 years of holding on to a promise made from love, kept out of love, and finally broken for love. After some time, she washed her face, drank some water, and checked on Drummond, who was now stable and recovering well. Then she lay back, staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the desert sounds. Tomorrow, Ghost would test her. Tomorrow, the team would finally see what Barrett Calloway had spent 6 years building in his daughter. Tomorrow, she would stop hiding. There would be no more pretending her calculations were just reading heat waves. Tomorrow, she would let them see everything, just as her father had taught her, just as the mission demanded it. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting to stop pretending. She was asleep before 3 in the morning. For the first time in 3 weeks, she slept through the night. Ghost ran the test just like he did everything else, with no fuss and no second chances. The team gathered at 800 hours. Targets were set at 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Ghost stood with his M40A5 rifle and a scope, his face unreadable. He would let her skills speak for themselves. Raven picked up the rifle, feeling its familiar weight and balance. It was a newer version of her father's rifle, and her hands knew exactly where to go. 600, Ghost commanded. Wind is about 5 miles per hour from the west. Let's see it. She lay down, deployed the bipod, and settled her cheek against the stock. She did the math in her head faster than most people could even get a proper grip. She calculated for wind, bullet drop, and made the adjustment. She breathed in, held it, let half out, found the quiet moment between her heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. Ghost looked through his scope for a moment. Center mass. Hammer, standing behind her, said nothing, but she could feel him reevaluating everything he thought he knew. 800. She adjusted the scope, recalculated, found her calm, and fired. The entire sequence took just 17 seconds. Upper chest, Ghost said. Faster than I thought. 800 is a comfortable distance, Raven stated simply. Garrett made a noise that was almost a laugh, and no one stopped him. 1,000, Ghost said. Take your time on this one. She did not rush. 1,000 meters is where simple skill is not enough. This is where her father had taught her something that was not in any manual. It was the skill of reading the air itself, of feeling the space between her and the target as something alive and constantly changing. She watched the heat waves through the scope, judged the wind at different points, calculated the arc, adjusted, became still, and fired. 2 long seconds passed. Ghost was silent for 5 more seconds, then said, dead center. Behind her, Hammer let out a long, slow breath. It was the sound of a man seeing something beyond what he believed was possible. Strauss stepped up, his voice calm, but his eyes wide. Calloway, tell me the truth. What is your maximum effective range? 1,400 meters, sir. I have done it many times in the right conditions. Strauss looked over at Ghost. Ghost stared at the distant target. When he finally looked back, his expression was the most shocked she had ever seen. Most elite soldiers here top out between 900 and 1,100, Ghost said. 1400 is beyond what we require. He paused. The fact she hits a 1,000-meter target with a new weapon in unfamiliar conditions, he trailed off. That is not just good shooting. That is a once-in-a-generation talent. My father was a good teacher, Raven said quietly. Your father was amazing, Ghost corrected. But even the best teachers can only get that result if the student has something that cannot be taught. He looked right at her. You have it. You have had it this whole time. You have been hiding it for 10 years. His words did not sound like an accusation, but like an acknowledgement that went straight to her soul. Strauss addressed the team. So, this is our new reality. We have a medic who is also a world-class sniper. We need both of her skills, and we are not going to waste them. He scanned the group. Show of hands. Who wants Calloway to serve as both our medic and our marksman? Every single hand shot up instantly. Just then, Walsh called in from his hospital bed in Germany. His voice was weak, but clear. She saved my life, and she is a better shot than anyone here. Of course, yes, of course. Raven looked down at the ground, taking a deep breath. Then it is settled, Strauss announced. Calloway, from this moment on, you have two jobs. You are our combat medic and our secondary designated marksman. Ghost is still primary. You give medical aid and provide sniper support when needed. We will change our plans to use both of your skills. He paused. You will need more training. Moving targets, night shooting, long-range factors. Ghost will handle that. Yes, sir. One last thing. Strauss's voice changed, becoming more personal. Your father trained you very well. I am sorry you had to break a promise to use his gift. But I am very glad you did. This whole team is glad you did. She could only nod, not trusting her own voice. The team started to walk away. Ghost remained. He waited until they were alone. Tomorrow, your advanced training begins. We will work on moving targets, low-light shooting, and long-distance environmental skills. He paused. What your father started, we will now perfect. He watched her for a second. You are done hiding now. Yes, Senior Chief. Good. He began to leave, then stopped and turned back, saving the most important words for last. Barrett told me something when I first met him. He said, Son, I am not teaching my daughter how to be a killer. He told her, I am teaching you to be a protector. One day, someone will need you, and you will be the only one there to help. His words echoed in her mind. Just 2 nights ago, she had faced that choice and made the right call. But now, he was gone. Raven was left alone with his rifle, her thoughts, and a life built on a 10-year promise. That promise was now broken, a part of her past. It was changing into something new, something she could not yet name. 3 weeks later, a mission order arrived with a red stripe at the top. That stripe meant the highest command was watching. This mission was urgent and extremely sensitive. An American journalist, Thomas Wakefield, had been captured. He was covering the refugee crisis near the Turkish border. His captors were a militia with known connections to foreign fighters. Intelligence reports said he would be killed within 48 hours and a video would be released. This was exactly the kind of event that put everyone under intense pressure. The goal was to get him back quietly before any cameras started filming. During the Friday afternoon briefing, Raven found herself in a familiar room. 6 weeks ago, she sat in the back, just the medic who stayed behind. But today, she sat in the middle of the table. Strauss explained the mission. The target was a compound in a valley near the Turkish-Syrian border. There was only one road in and one road out. They expected between 15 and 20 fighters. Wakefield was confirmed to be alive just 12 hours ago. Stone would provide cover from the ridgeline. Raven was on the entry team. She would carry a full combat load, her M4 rifle, and her medical kit. Walsh, sitting 2 seats away, raised his hand. His leg was still a bit stiff from a recent injury. What if Stone cannot get a clear shot? Does Calloway provide cover? Strauss answered the unspoken question. Walsh nodded as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. 3 weeks ago, no one would have suggested that. The team practiced the mission until midnight. They rehearsed every step, every backup plan, until their actions became instinct. Raven practiced her medical skills and combat skills together. She knew that blending them seamlessly was the key to success. At 3 in the morning, she checked her equipment one last time. Her medical pack weighed 40 pounds. Her M4 rifle was loaded with 4 extra magazines. With her M9 pistol, armor, and gear, she carried 105 pounds. She had carried this weight before, and she would carry it again. The helicopter flight in was smooth, low, and fast before the sun came up. They touched down in a dry riverbed 2 kilometers from their target. The helicopter lifted off before the dust even settled. Stone left to find his lookout spot. The rest of the team advanced on the compound. There were 6 operators and 1 medic, and no one doubted her anymore. After 40 minutes of silent movement, Stone's voice suddenly came over the radio. "I am in position. I can see the target." He paused for 3 seconds. "I am seeing more heat signatures than we expected. I count 35 to 40 people." Strauss's jaw grew tight. "Confirm that count." "Confirmed," Stone replied. "Several vehicles must have arrived during the night. The intelligence was wrong." It was very wrong. 35 to 40 fighters was more than double what they had planned for. This mission had just become far more dangerous. Any mistake would be fatal. But Strauss made his decision instantly. "We are proceeding. If we pull back now, Wakefield will not survive," he said to the team. "Expect a much tougher fight. Stone, take out anyone who threatens our escape route first. Entry team, be quick and stay together. Get in, get the target, and get out." They lined up at the door to break in. Beckett was first with the explosive charge, then Hammer, then Strauss, with Raven fourth in line. Garrett and Dixon were 5th and 6th. The charge was ready. After a silent countdown, the door exploded inward. The team moved inside like water. The first room was empty. In the second, 2 men were reaching for their guns. Hammer and Beckett neutralized them instantly. In the third room, they found Wakefield tied to a chair. His face was swollen, his shirt was bloody, and his eyes grew wide when he saw them. Raven went to him right away. She did a quick check. He likely had broken ribs and injuries to his face. He was weak from lack of food and water, but he could walk with help. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I think so." "Stay close to me and hold on to my arm." Just then, a rocket-propelled grenade hit the east wall. The world turned upside down. The force of the blast threw Raven against the wall, and her vision went blurry for a moment. Before the ringing in her ears even faded, she checked herself for injuries. Her arms and legs were fine, and she wasn't bleeding badly. Wakefield was on the floor, scared but unhurt. She helped him to his feet. But then she saw Drummond was down. He had shrapnel wounds in his left leg and hip. One wound was bleeding bright red blood. It was a damaged artery. Her hands were already at work. She pulled out a tourniquet and placed it high on his thigh. She wrapped it, tightened the rod, and twisted. Drummond's face twisted in pain. She kept turning it 3 times, then 4. The bleeding stopped. It took her only 15 seconds. That was faster than before. Her body remembered what her mind had practiced. "You are stable now. Do not move," she said. Then Stone's strained voice came over the radio. "You have a machine gun firing on you from the north rooftop. It is 380 meters away. I cannot see it from here." Strauss took in the situation in a single glance. Drummond was wounded. Wakefield was hurt but could move. And a machine gun had them trapped inside with 35 enemies closing in. Raven crept to the window and looked at the roof. It was elevated, 380 meters away. She saw a 2-man team, 1 shooting and 1 loading. "Commander, I have a clear shot at that gun." Strauss glanced from the wounded Drummond to Raven. "You need to stay with the injured man. Drummond is stable," she replied. "The tourniquet is working. He will be fine for 10 minutes. She said it calmly and with confidence, making it hard to disagree. "None of us will last 10 minutes if that gun keeps firing." Strauss knew it was true. "Take the shot," he ordered. She got into position at the window, raising her M4 rifle. She quickly judged the distance. 380 meters. A light wind blew from the northwest. She calculated for the bullet drop over that distance. The enemy was partly hidden behind a shield. Only the gunner's head and upper chest were visible. It was a small target at a tough angle. She steadied her breathing, waited for the pause between heartbeats, and fired. The first gunner fell. Another man instantly replaced him, staying lower and showing only his head. She adjusted her aim for the new target and fired again. A direct hit. The machine gun stopped firing. Excellent shot, Stone confirmed on the radio. Get to the extraction point. Now! The team started moving. They carried Drummond on a stretcher. Garrett helped Wakefield walk. Raven and Strauss guarded the rear. Then Stone's voice came again, this time filled with tension. I have been hit, my right shoulder. I cannot hold my rifle. You have lost your cover from above. Raven looked through her scope. An 8-man squad was 200 meters away and moving in quickly. They were organized and experienced. Commander, I can hold them off. It will buy you time to get to the landing zone. No, Strauss said. We need you with the wounded. Drummond is stable, she insisted. Wakefield does not need a medic right now, but in 4 minutes, those 8 men will be on top of us. We will all be dead. She looked him straight in the eye. Give me 90 seconds. That will give you 10 minutes. Strauss did not like the plan, but he agreed. 90 seconds, and then you get out. That is an order. Yes, sir. She ran to find a good defensive spot with clear sight of the enemy. 8 targets were now at 180 meters. She aimed at the man in front and fired 2 shots. He went down. The squad immediately scattered and returned fire with heavy, accurate shots. She moved 20 meters to her right to get a new angle. She kept firing, calm and steady, just like her father taught her. She had practiced this 1,000 times when the only targets were made of steel. 30 seconds passed. 2 more enemies were down. At 45 seconds, 3 more appeared on her left. She changed her position and took them down. At 60 seconds, the last 3 hit the dirt. After 75 seconds, 1 stood up with a rocket launcher. At that moment, the rescue helicopter appeared in the sky. She could hear the sound of its blades. If he fired that rocket, everyone would die. The people on the helicopter and the people on the ground. Everything they had done tonight would be for nothing. She calculated everything in an instant. The wind, the distance, the movement. The man was 240 meters away and raising the launcher. She fired 1 shot. He fell, and the weapon dropped to the ground without firing. Her 90 seconds were up. Run, Calloway, run! Strauss yelled over the radio. She sprinted from her cover, carrying all 105 pounds of her gear. She had 150 meters to cross to the landing zone. The last 2 enemies shot at her, bullets zipping past her head. Hammer was waiting at the door. Come on, Hawk, move! 50 meters, then 25. He grabbed her and pulled her inside just as the helicopter took off. The helicopter turned sharply and sped away. They were safe. The team was silent on the flight back. No one spoke for a long time. Wakefield sat against the far wall with a blanket over him. He just stared at Raven. He knew that his life was saved by a 22-year-old woman he had just met, a woman he could never truly thank. But she did not need thanks. She just needed Drummond's tourniquet to hold, which it did. And she needed the helicopter to keep flying, which it did. 2 weeks after the mission, Vice Admiral Marcus Holt visited their base. In front of her entire team, he awarded Raven Calloway with a special patch, recognizing her incredible skill and bravery. A red cross was emblazoned on the trident. It was a first in the entire history of naval special warfare. This officially recognized her as a combat medic and a designated marksman simultaneously. Holt affixed the patch to her uniform, then stepped back, his face showing the relief of a man repaying a 10-year debt. He said, Barrett gave you 2 distinct skills, Petty Officer Calloway. 1 for healing and 1 for fighting. Use them both. He paused for effect. That is a direct order. Yes, sir, she replied. She stood at perfect attention before her squad, feeling the gravity of the insignia and everything it symbolized. For the very first time, she allowed a wave of pride to wash over her without pushing it away. The applause started with Walsh. Hammer and Garrett joined in, and then the whole room followed. As the sound of clapping filled the space, Raven stared straight ahead, her back rigid. She finally heard her father's voice in her memory, speaking the words she had struggled to understand for a decade. Raven, I'm not teaching you how to kill. I'm teaching you how to protect. Someday, someone will need that protection, and you will be the only one there to provide it. Now, she finally understood his true meaning. It was not about the simple mechanics of the shot, the physics, the wind, the pause between heartbeats, or the trigger control. All of that was merely the craft. He had been teaching her a lesson that was far older and deeper than any skill. He showed her that protection is an action, not a passive hope. That real love, the kind that demands a sacrifice, sometimes looks like a bandage and other times looks like a bullet. She realized that both actions require the exact same thing from the person delivering them. The resolve to act when the moment came, the judgment to know when it had arrived, and the courage to accept that such a moment was inevitable. She was Raven Calloway, 22 years old, daughter of Master Gunnery Sergeant Barrett Calloway, a hospital corpsman, first class, combat medic, and designated marksman. For 10 years, she had wrongly believed she had to pick between the two halves of herself that her father had forged. She had been completely wrong. The answer was to use both hands. That was always the only answer. And from this moment on, she would embrace them both.